Have you ever met someone on a morning when everything was going wrong, only to realise later that moment had changed everything? That was the kind of morning Evan Miller was having. The old truck coughed and wheezed but refused to start. Snow had fallen all night, coating the quiet streets of Haven Ridge in a thin white blanket. Evan turned the key again, knuckles tight on the steering wheel, but the only answer was a hollow click. In the passenger seat, his daughter Ellie sat bundled in her oversized coat, backpack hugged close, curls poking out from under a knitted hat. "Not today," Evan muttered under his breath. "Please, not today." Ellie glanced up at him, eyes wide. "We're gonna be late, huh?" "Looks like it," he admitted with a tired smile. Footsteps crunched in the snow. Evan looked up to see a woman in dark scrubs under a long winter coat, a canvas tote slung over her shoulder. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, her eyes carrying that look of someone who'd worked through the night but still had enough kindness left to offer. "You need a hand?" she asked, her voice calm but steady. "I just got off a shift at the county hospital. Thought I heard a truck losing a fight with the cold." Evan cracked a wry smile. "Losing is about right, starter's shot. Unless you've got a miracle in that bag, I'm stuck." The woman gave a small laugh. "No miracle, but I can call roadside for you. Service is decent here, and you two shouldn't be freezing out in this." Ellie leaned forward, her mitten pressed against the window. "Are you a nurse?" The woman crouched down a little so Ellie could see her better. "That's right, name's Maya." Ellie's face brightened. "I'm Ellie, and that's my dad." Maya smiled at her before looking back at Evan. "Roadside can be here in half an hour. There's a lobby at the hospital across the street. You'll be warmer there." Evan hesitated. He wasn't the type to accept help easily. But Ellie's fingers were already turning red, and pride wasn't worth frostbite. "All right," he said quietly. Minutes later, the three of them were in the hospital lobby, the heater humming above and the faint smell of coffee drifting from a vending machine. Maya bought Ellie a packet of hot chocolate, stirring it with a wooden stick until steam curled in the air. Ellie took the cup in both hands, sipping carefully. Then from her backpack she pulled out a folded piece of paper. On it was a half-finished drawing of a bright blue kite with a long trailing tail. She handed it to Maya with the seriousness only a child could have. "Can you keep this safe for me, just for today?" Maya looked down at the drawing for a long moment. The crayon lines were uneven, the paper wrinkled, but somehow it felt alive. She tucked it carefully into her tote and nodded. "I'll keep it safe." Evan watched the exchange, surprised at how naturally this stranger fit into their morning. He didn't know it yet, but that kite, passed from his daughter's small hands to Maya's, wasn't just a drawing. It was the beginning of something none of them could see yet. And sometimes the smallest act of kindness is what rewrites everything. Haven Ridge moved at its own pace. To outsiders it seemed sleepy, but for those who lived here, every day had its own rhythm. Evan's rhythm was simple but heavy. Long shifts at the garage, grease under his nails, boots worn thin, and a constant calculation in his head about what bill could wait and which one couldn't. He never complained, at least not in front of Ellie. She didn't need to carry that weight. Maya's rhythm was different. As a travel nurse, she lived on rotating shifts and short contracts, never anywhere long enough to unpack completely. 13 weeks here, then on to another city. She told herself she liked it that way. New places, new faces, no one asking her to stay. But as she walked the small streets of Haven Ridge after long nights at the county hospital, she couldn't help noticing how the town seemed to breathe differently. Slower, steadier, almost daring her to rest. And then there was Ellie's rhythm. School during the day, after-school club until her dad could pick her up, and endless drawings at night. Her latest project was a bright blue kite with a tail so long she was sure it could touch the clouds. She talked about it constantly, as if building that kite would fix something invisible even her dad didn't have words for. It was a Thursday evening when their paths crossed again. Evan had stopped at the grocery store after work, picking up milk and a box of pasta. He was half awake, pushing a squeaky cart down the aisle, when Ellie spotted someone at the checkout. "Miss Maya," she called, her voice carrying. Maya turned, surprised, holding a small basket with eggs and bread, her scrubs peeking from under her coat. A tired smile spread across her face as she lifted her hand in greeting. Evan shook his head with a chuckle. "Careful, kiddo. People are going to think she's your teacher." Ellie grinned, cheeks red. She's nicer than my teacher. Maya laughed at that, and the sound felt lighter than Evan expected. Best compliment I've had all week. They chatted for a minute near the doors, the automatic glass sliding open and closed with a hiss. Evan thanked her again for the morning she helped, and Maya teased him gently about keeping a truck that should have retired years ago. It was an ordinary exchange, neighbours in a small town crossing paths. But something about the way Ellie leaned toward Maya, like she'd already decided this woman was safe, made Evan pause. As they walked out to the lot, Ellie noticed something peeking from Maya's tote bag. "You still have it," she gasped. Maya pulled out the folded paper drawing, the blue kite. The crease was deeper now, but she smoothed it with her hand. "Of course I do, I said I'd keep it safe." Ellie's eyes sparkled. "Then you have to come Saturday. We're finishing the real one at the club. It's going to be the biggest kite ever." Maya hesitated. She wasn't one to make promises in towns she'd eventually leave. But the way Ellie's face tilted up, all hope and certainty, made it impossible to say no. "All right," she said softly. "Saturday I'll be there." Evan didn't say much, but as they buckled into the truck, he glanced at Ellie in the rearview mirror. She was still grinning, hugging her backpack like a secret. He wanted to hold on to that smile. He didn't tell her about the red for sale sign he had noticed hammered into the fence behind their yard earlier that week. He didn't tell her how close the numbers were to breaking them. Instead, he just drove home through the quiet streets, the sound of the engine louder than either of them spoke, and the thought of that sign pressed heavy against his chest. Saturday morning brought the kind of sunlight that made the snow look softer, though the wind was still sharp against the skin. At the community centre, kids crowded into the old gym, voices bouncing off the high ceiling. Folding tables were covered with cardboard, tape, glue sticks and half-finished models. Evan carried in a box of scrapwood from the garage, setting it down with a grunt. Ellie darted ahead, waving when she spotted Maya. "You came!" Ellie shouted, almost tripping over her boots. Maya was already kneeling beside a little boy struggling to tape wings onto a glider. She looked up and smiled. She wasn't in scrubs this time, just jeans and a sweater, hair loose in a braid. "Told you I'd be here," she said. Ellie grabbed her hand eagerly. "Come on, we're making the big one today, the blue kite." For the next hour, the three of them worked side by side. Maya held the frame steady while Ellie wrapped it with tissue paper, her tongue sticking out in concentration. Evan tied knots, his rough hands more used to fixing engines than fragile paper, but he followed Ellie's instructions without complaint. Other kids laughed and shouted around them, but at their table the rhythm was steady. Glue, fold, tie, trim. By the time they were done, the kite stretched nearly as tall as Ellie. "You sure this thing will fly?" Evan asked, eyebrows raised. Ellie crossed her arms. "Of course it will, we built it together." Maya chuckled, brushing glue from her palms. "Well, there's only one way to find out." Outside, the wind whipped across the field behind the centre. Evan held the spool tight as Ellie ran forward, the blue kite bobbing clumsily at first before the gust caught it. Suddenly it lifted, climbing higher and higher, its long tail streaming like a banner against the pale sky. Ellie squealed, laughing so hard her cheeks flushed pink. "Look, it's flying!" Maya clapped, shielding her eyes, a smile spreading across her face. For a moment, the world felt lighter, like the three of them had built something stronger than paper and string. Then the wind shifted. The spool jerked in Ellie's hands. "Dad!" she cried. Evan grabbed the line, but the sudden gust was too strong. The twine snapped with a sharp crack, the kite lurching wildly before the wind carried it away. "Run!" Ellie shouted, already sprinting across the field. They chased it, laughter and panic tangled together, but the kite sailed farther than their legs could carry. Finally it dipped, snagging high in the branches of an old oak at the edge of a fenced-off lot. Its blue paper fluttered stubbornly against the grey wood of the for sale sign hammered into the ground. Ellie stopped at the fence, chest heaving, her mitten pressed against the rough metal wire. "It's stuck," she whispered. Evan caught up, resting a hand on her shoulder. He stared at the sign, at the red letters he'd been trying not to think about. The land beyond the fence wasn't just dirt and trees. It was the space where Ellie played tag, where he fixed her sled in winter, where her laughter had lived for years. Maya stepped up beside them, her voice gentle. Sometimes kites get caught, doesn't mean you can't bring them back down. Ellie's eyes stayed fixed on the fluttering blue paper above. We have to save it, she said quietly. If we don't, we'll lose more than the kite. Evan didn't answer, but her words sank deep, because he knew she was right. Monday morning carried a damp chill, the kind that crept through coats and settled in the bones. Evan parked his truck outside the town office, staring for a long moment at the brick building before stepping out. His boots crunched against salt scattered on the sidewalk. He wasn't the kind of man who feared much, but paperwork had a way of reminding him where he fell short. Maya had insisted on coming. She said she was heading into town anyway, though Evan suspected she didn't trust him to face it alone. She walked beside him through the glass doors, her tote slung over one shoulder, hair tucked under a knitted hat. Inside, the air smelled faintly of copier ink and old coffee. A row of chairs lined the hallway, filled with neighbours waiting on permits or licences. Evan took a number and sat down, folding the slip in his hands until it was soft at the edges. Maya sat quietly beside him. "You okay?" she asked softly. He gave a dry laugh, and depends on what they say. When his number was called, they approached the counter. A clerk in a bulky cardigan shuffled through a file, adjusted her glasses, and sighed. There's a balance on the property taxes. With fees, you're looking at about $1,800. If it's not cleared, the lot goes up for auction. The words hit harder than Evan expected, even though he'd known something like this was coming. He swallowed. Is there any kind of plan, something I can work out? The clerk nodded, sliding a paper across the counter. You can request a payment schedule, 6 months, first instalment due within 30 days. Evan thanked her, voice low, and walked out with the forms under his arm. The hallway echoed with the weight of his boots. Outside, he leaned against the wall, rubbing the back of his neck. I fix cars, Maya. I don't make that kind of money in 30 days. Maya looked at him for a long moment, then said quietly, When I was 12, my mum missed a couple of payments on our house. We packed everything in a weekend and moved into a 1-bedroom above a laundromat. I remember staring at the boxes, thinking the ground had been pulled right out from under me. Evan turned to her. Her voice wasn't dramatic, it was steady, matter-of-fact, but the truth in it hit harder than pity ever could. You lost your home? He asked. Maya nodded. I swore I'd never let myself get tied down again. But I also know what it feels like to be that kid, watching the only safe place you know disappear. She glanced back toward the truck, where Ellie's car seat still sat in the back. She deserves better than that. Evan stared at the forms in his hands, the numbers swimming on the page. He didn't have an answer, not yet. But the way Maya said she deserves better lodged in his chest. That evening, at home, he sat at the kitchen table while Ellie padded in wearing her pyjamas, notebook clutched to her chest. She climbed into the chair across from him and slid it toward him. On the cover, written in uneven marker, were the words, "The Blue Kite Plan." What's this? He asked, raising a brow. Ellie opened to the first page, where she'd drawn a picture of the tree, the kite, and a dollar sign floating beside it. It's how we're going to save the yard. I wrote down ideas. Evan's throat tightened. The drawings were crooked, the spelling half wrong, but the determination was fierce. She believed they could do it, because in her world, kites could carry more than paper and string. They could carry hope. And for the first time all day, Evan let himself believe a little too. The week after their visit to the town office carried a strange weight. Evan kept late hours at the garage, grease ground deep into his hands, trying to squeeze every dollar from each job. At night, he sat at the kitchen table long after Ellie had gone to bed, staring at the payment forms until the numbers blurred. On Thursday evening, Maya stopped by after her shift. She was still in her scrubs, exhaustion written across her face, but she carried a thermos of soup. You'll work yourself into the ground if all you eat is coffee, she said, setting it on the table. Evan gave a small smile. You're not wrong. She pulled out a chair and sat across from him. For a while they didn't talk. The lamp hummed overhead, and the house felt too quiet. Finally, Maya broke the silence. I wasn't planning on staying here long. That's the truth. My contracts usually last 13 weeks, and then I move on. It's how I've kept my head above water. New town, new hospital, no strings. Evan listened, his elbows resting on the table. He knew what it meant to build walls, different kind of walls maybe, but the same idea. "And now?" he asked. Maya looked down at her hands, then out the window where snow pressed against the glass. "Now, it feels different here, slower, like maybe I don't have to keep running." Evan leaned back, exhaling. "My dad used to say roots are what keep you steady in a storm, but I tried that once. Married young, thought I was building something solid. She left when Ellie was 4. Took her suitcase and said she wasn't made for small-town life. Haven't seen much of her since." His voice caught slightly, but he didn't look away. "Roots can rot too." Maya's eyes softened. "And yet you stayed." "I had to. Ellie needed someone to show up. Kids don't care if you're perfect. They just care if you're there when the lights go out." The words hung in the room, heavy but honest. Small footsteps padded in then. Ellie appeared in pyjamas, curls sticking in every direction, her notebook hugged to her chest. She climbed onto Maya's lap without hesitation and flipped to a page filled with scribbles and drawings. "Here," Ellie said proudly, "it's the next part of the Blue Kite plan. Bake sales, lemonade stands, even a car wash when it's warm." Maya laughed softly, brushing a curl from Ellie's forehead. "That's a lot of work," Ellie nodded fiercely, "but if everyone helps we can save the yard." Evan watched the two of them bent over the notebook, the stranger who wasn't a stranger anymore, and his daughter who trusted too easily, but maybe trusted just right. He noticed the way Maya didn't just listen, she leaned in, encouraging Ellie's every word like they mattered. For someone who always said she never stayed long, she was already weaving herself into the fabric of their days. When Ellie finally dozed off against Maya's shoulder, Evan carried her to bed. He returned to the kitchen and found Maya still at the table, the notebook open in front of her. "You know," he said quietly, "you're not just helping her dream, you're making this place feel possible again." Maya met his eyes, surprised, but didn't look away. "Maybe I needed that as much as you do." Neither of them said more. The only sound was the faint rattle of wind against the window. But something had shifted. The house felt less like a burden and more like a place someone might want to stay. Saturday dawned with the smell of cinnamon rolls drifting from the bakery downtown, and the sound of neighbours sweeping porches. On the Miller front lawn, Evan and Ellie set up a folding table with whatever they could spare, an old lamp, a box of worn tools, a stack of used books. Ellie had made a sign in bright markers: "Blue Kite Yard Sale. Help us save our yard." The letters tilted sideways, her 7-year-old handwriting loud enough to catch the eye of anyone walking by. Maya showed up early, balancing 2 trays of cookies she had baked the night before. "They may not be pretty," she said, setting them down, "but people will buy anything if it's for a good cause." Evan grinned, brushing snow from his jacket. "Smells better than anything in my garage, so I'd say you're ahead." Neighbours trickled in. Some browsed the tables, others dropped coins and bills straight into the mason jar Ellie had decorated with stickers. A retired teacher bought 3 paperbacks and promised to donate them back once she was finished. The farmer from down the road handed over a 20 for the old toolbox and said, "Don't worry about change." Ellie darted from one person to another, explaining the whole story about the blue kite and the for sale sign in the yard. Her honesty, simple and unpolished, made people smile. Children from her school brought allowance money and quarters, proud to be part of something bigger. Halfway through the morning, an older man in a weathered coat paused at the table. He picked up the broken frame of Ellie's first kite, the one she had given up on months ago. Its paper was torn, edges frayed. "How much for this?" he asked. Evan shook his head. "That one's just scrap." But the man pressed a bill into Ellie's mittened hand. His voice was rough, carrying the weight of memory. "My boy loved kites, lost him overseas years back. Seeing this one, it's worth more than you know." For a moment, the yard grew quiet. Maya blinked hard, Evan swallowed, and Ellie looked up at the man with all the seriousness her small frame could hold. "Then it's yours," she whispered. By late afternoon, the table was nearly empty, the cookies gone, the mason jar heavy with coins and crumpled bills. When they counted the total at the kitchen table, the stack came to a little over $1,000, more than Evan had dared to hope. But his smile faltered when he looked at the payment notice tucked under the salt shaker. "We're still short," he admitted quietly. "About 400. About 4. Silence lingered. Maya looked down at her flour-stained hands, searching for words. Ellie didn't hesitate. She hopped down from her chair, ran to the window, and pressed her hand against the glass. Outside, the oak tree loomed, its branches bare against the winter sky. The torn blue kite still clung stubbornly to the highest limb, fluttering against the cold. "Then tomorrow," she said firmly, her voice steady in a way that made both adults stop. "We're going to get it back. The kite will help us." Maya glanced at Evan, and for the first time neither tried to soften her conviction. Because they both knew Ellie wasn't just talking about paper and string, she was talking about hope. Sunday morning came with a restless wind. The sky was pale, the kind of white that promised more snow before long. Evan dragged the old wooden ladder from the garage and set it against the oak tree. The blue kite still dangled high in the branches, its tail caught like it was daring them to climb. Maya stood nearby, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the ladder. "That thing looks like it's older than the house," she said. Evan tested the first rung with his boot. "It'll hold long enough?" Ellie clutched the spool of twine in her mittened hands. "Dad, please be careful. We can't lose it." "I won't," he said, trying to sound more certain than he felt. The first few steps were easy, but halfway up, the ladder wobbled with the gusts, the wood groaning under his weight. Maya rushed forward, gripping the sides. "Don't even think about falling," she muttered through gritted teeth. "Wasn't planning on it," Evan called down, though his knuckles were white. He stretched higher, fingers brushing the branch. The kite flapped wildly, its tail tangled tight. With one last reach, he snapped the twine free. The kite tumbled into his arms, battered but still whole. When his boots touched the ground again, Ellie squealed and wrapped herself around him, nearly knocking the kite from his hands. "You got it! You really got it!" Evan laughed breathlessly. "We got it because Maya kept me steady." Ellie turned to Maya, eyes shining. "Then it belongs to all of us." Later that afternoon, Ellie had an idea. She spread the kite across the dining table, smoothing the wrinkled paper with small, careful hands. "It's not just ours anymore," she said. "Everyone helped us yesterday, so everyone should sign it." So they did. Neighbours stopped by one, leaving their names in marker along the tail. Kids from school, the farmer from the sale, the retired teacher, even the quiet man from the feed store who rarely spoke more than a few words. Each signature wasn't just ink, it was a promise. By evening, the kite's tail was patched together like a quilt of voices. Ellie held it up proudly. "Now it can't get lost," she whispered, "because everyone's holding on." Evan stared at the messy row of names, his throat tight. It wasn't just paper and string anymore, it was proof that they weren't fighting this alone. Maya leaned on the doorway, watching father and daughter with a softness in her eyes. "That kite's stronger than any mortgage notice," she said quietly. But as Evan tucked the folded payment plan back into his jacket pocket, he felt the truth pressing down again. Signatures and hope were powerful, but bills still came due. That night, as the wind rattled the windows, Evan sat at the table staring at the kite propped on the counter. And for the first time in years, he wondered if maybe, just maybe, their little family wasn't as alone as he thought. It was a Friday evening, the kind where the house smelled of tomato soup and grilled cheese. Ellie sat at the table, colouring a new page in her notebook while Maya rinsed dishes at the sink. The light outside had turned blue with dusk, and Evan was still at the garage, running late. Then came the knock, firm 3 times against the wooden door. Ellie looked up. "Daddy?" she asked, but he wasn't home yet. Maya wiped her hands and opened the door. A woman stood on the porch, wrapped in a tailored wool coat, hair neat, eyes sharp, but not unkind. For a moment Maya hesitated. "I'm looking for Evan Miller," the woman said. Her voice was steady, though a little tight. Before Maya could answer, Ellie's crayon dropped to the floor. She rose slowly from her chair, her small voice trembling. "Mum?" The woman's eyes softened instantly, her hand hovering uncertainly in the air. "Ellie, look at you." Maya stepped aside as Ellie rushed forward, stopping just short before being pulled into a hesitant embrace. By the time Evan arrived home, grease on his jacket and weariness in his eyes, the living room was silent. He froze in the doorway when he saw her. "Laura." She stood smoothing her coat, her voice unsteady. "Evan?" The air between them tightened with years unsaid. He set his keys down slowly, watching her every move. "Why are you here?" Laura glanced at Ellie, then back at him. "Because I couldn't stay away any longer. I know I don't deserve it, but I want to see her. I want to try again. I want to try." Evan's jaw clenched. "After 3 years? After she cried herself to sleep asking where you were?" Laura flinched, her shoulders falling. "I know, I was selfish. I thought leaving would give me freedom, but it only left me empty. I've spent every day wondering what I lost. I don't expect forgiveness. I need a chance to be part of her life, even a small part." Ellie looked between them, confusion pressing into her brow. "Do I have to choose?" she whispered. Evan knelt quickly, pulling her close. "No, baby, you don't ever have to choose. Not between us." Maya stood quietly in the corner, the observer, her hands folded in front of her. She wasn't part of this history, yet her presence steadied the room like a quiet anchor. Laura finally noticed her and asked softly, "And you are?" Maya met her gaze calmly. Maya, a friend. The word felt too small, but it was the safest one she could give. Laura's eyes lingered, something flickering there. Curiosity, maybe even unease, but she said nothing more. That night, after Laura left with a promise to return, Evan sat on the porch steps, his face buried in his hands. Maya joined him, pulling her coat tighter against the cold. For a long while they said nothing, the silence filled only by the creak of the porch boards. Finally, Evan spoke. "She can't just walk back in and expect everything to be fixed." Maya's voice was quiet, measured. "But she's still Ellie's mum." He nodded heavily. "Yeah, and that's what scares me." Inside, Ellie taped the patched blue kite to the fridge. She stared at it for a long moment, whispering under her breath like it was a prayer. If the kite belongs to everyone, maybe people can too. Her words hung in the air, unseen by the adults outside, but they were exactly the kind of truth only a child could name. The days after Laura's visit felt heavy, like the air before a storm. Evan buried himself in extra shifts at the garage, working late into the night. Ellie grew quieter, scribbling drawings in her notebook that she didn't always show. And Maya stayed. She didn't declare it, she didn't stand up and make promises. Instead, she shifted her days in small but undeniable ways. She asked her supervisor at the hospital to change a few night shifts so she could keep Saturdays free. She moved her lease from a short-term sublet to a rolling contract, no longer keeping her suitcase by the door. And one evening, she showed up at the miller's front porch with a box of flyers tucked under her arm. "What's all this?" Evan asked, wiping his hands on a rag after fixing the squeaky screen door. "Spanish classes," Maya said, a little sheepish. "Free for kids at the community centre. They needed a volunteer and I figured I had Saturdays now." Ellie's eyes lit up. "Can I come? I want to learn how to say kite in Spanish." Maya laughed. "Comita," she told her, tapping the flyer. "But you'll have to help me keep the crayons from rolling away when the little ones get restless." Evan leaned against the doorframe, studying her. She said it so casually, like it wasn't a big deal. But to him it was. People who were passing through didn't start free classes at the community centre. People who were leaving soon didn't bother making space for Saturdays. Later that week, Evan walked into the kitchen after a long day and found Maya at the table, sleeves rolled up, helping Ellie glue together another cardboard plane. Crayon smudges dotted her hands, and Ellie's laughter filled the room. For a moment, Evan just stood in the doorway, watching. Something about the scene, the lamp glow, the hum of the heater, the way Maya leaned in to listen to every detail Ellie offered, made him feel like this wasn't temporary. That night when Maya left, Evan sat at the same table alone. He glanced at the mason jar of yard sale money on the counter, then at the stack of forms he hadn't mailed yet. His gaze drifted to the fridge, where Ellie had taped the patched blue kite tail, its fabric crowded with signatures. And he realised something. For months, maybe years, he had carried the fight by himself, bracing for things to fall apart. But now, he wasn't the only one holding the string anymore. Meanwhile, across town, Maya sat in her small apartment, staring at an email from the staffing agency. A new hospital wanted her. Better pay, modern facilities, no snow-covered driveways to shovel. The cursor blinked on the word accept. For years, that would have been the easy answer. Pack up, move on, start over. But as she leaned back in her chair, she glanced at Ellie's drawing still tucked in her tote bag, the one of the blue kite with a tail long enough to touch the clouds. And for the first time, she didn't feel the urge to run. She felt the pull to stay. Spring in Haven Ridge arrived slow, like someone easing a heavy quilt off the valley. Snow shrank into ditches, birds returned to the telephone wires, and the old oak where the blue kite had once been stuck was budding with green. On the Miller lawn, folding chairs circled a wide patch of grass. The town had gathered for the spring festival, though this year it felt less like a holiday and more like something personal. Evan manned the grill with his usual quiet focus. Ellie darted between neighbours, showing off her newest cardboard airplane, and Maya carried trays of cookies she'd baked the night before. At one point, Ellie tugged Maya's sleeve and pulled her toward the big table at the centre. There, stretched across the wood, was the patched blue kite. Its paper was mended with tape, its tail covered in the messy signatures of half the town. Ellie held out a thick marker. "You forgot to sign it," she said matter-of-factly. Maya blinked, startled. "Me?" Ellie nodded. "It's our kite. You helped to save it. You belong on it too." Maya hesitated, the weight of the moment pressing heavier than the marker itself. But under the warm gaze of neighbours, under Evan's quiet nod from the grill, she leaned down and added her name in neat black letters along the tail. When she stood, she caught Evan watching her, not with surprise, but with something steadier, something like recognition. Later, as the sun dipped low and kites of every shape filled the sky, Evan, Maya and Ellie stood together at the edge of the field. Ellie's blue kite rose higher than the rest, the patched seams trembling but holding strong. The tail rippled with dozens of names, a banner of promises against the evening light. Ellie squeezed their hands. "Now it can't get lost," she whispered, "because everyone's holding on." For a long while, none of them spoke. The air smelled of cut grass and charcoal, the sound of laughter floating around them. Maya tilted her head back, watching the kite dance. She had spent years chasing skies, always leaving before anything tied her down. And yet here, in this small town with one blue kite, she felt something she hadn't in a long time. She felt home. That night, when the last chair was folded and neighbours drifted away, Evan walked Maya to the porch. The house behind them hummed with the sound of Ellie brushing her teeth and humming to herself. "You know," Evan said quietly, "you didn't have to sign that kite." Maya smiled faintly. "I know, that's why I did." He looked at her for a long moment, the porch light catching the tired lines on his face. Then, softly, he asked, "So what happens now?" Maya didn't promise forever. She didn't talk about next year or the year after. She just slipped her hand into his and said, "Now we stay, and we build something." Evan nodded once, as if that was all he needed. From inside, Ellie's voice called out, "Don't forget the blue kite rules. Dinner together, tell the truth, and don't fly alone." They both laughed, and for the first time in years, the sound carried not just relief, but belonging. The patched blue kite swayed gently in the night breeze through the kitchen window, a quiet reminder that even fragile things could hold if enough hands believed in them. And for the Millers, and for Maya, that was enough. Lesson: home isn't just a place, it's the people who choose to stay and build with you. Even fragile things, like a patched kite, can hold strong when enough hearts are willing to carry them together. Thank you so much for staying with us until the very end of this story. I'm truly grateful for your time and presence here. If the story touched you, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps us keep sharing more heartfelt journeys. Until next time, see you again on Rain Inside.